Hello and welcome back, future scientists. I'm Mr. K with Mississippi Public Broadcasting. We're going to continue our lecture today talking about ecology. Specifically today, we're talking about something known as succession. I'm not talking about your favorite TV show. Instead, I'm talking about how communities change over time. So let's go ahead and get into it. So we're talking about ecological succession. What is that? Succession is the process of change in species that make up a community over time. Succession occurs at newly created habitats or after a disturbance of a pre-existing habitat. So there's really two main types of succession. You can have primary succession, which is succession that occurs in new habitats. So imagine there's a piece of land that has never had any plants or animals on it. That would be primary succession. Then you can have secondary succession, which is succession that occurs after disturbance. So maybe you have a forest, there's a forest fire, a lot of the plants burn down, the soil is still intact, but now the community has to start over. That would be secondary succession. So the main difference is, has the habitat ever supported life before? That would be the difference in between primary and secondary succession. So let's look at this in a little bit more detail. Succession is the aging of an ecosystem. It's the process by which populations in an ecosystem are gradually replaced by new ecosystems. Each community in succession makes the environment better for the next community. Each group of organisms prepares the way for the next. And we're going to take a closer look at that here on the next slide. So take a look at this picture. This is a pretty good explanation of what succession is and what's going on. Let's read that top part. It says, the change in vegetation in an ecosystem as the soil matures and changes. The soil is enriched at each stage, preparing the way for more complex plants. This results in something known as a climax community. So let's start way over there on the left side of this picture. Okay, imagine we have, this might be new land that has never supported life. Maybe it was some kind of volcanic eruption that made new land once the lava flowed out and hardened. It could also be some sort of tectonic plate activity where there's uplift and now you've got new land that's never been exposed before. So what would happen is this land has nothing on it. Okay, the first organisms that make it there would be known as the pioneer organisms. And these are usually very small organisms, usually like mosses and other small plants. Okay, as time goes on, we're going to see different bigger plants come along. We'll start off with small plants and then shrubs, and then we'll have some softwood trees. And then look at the right side of this picture. Once a community has reached a stable, balanced existence, a climax community has been reached, which is often your very large trees, and especially in our part of the United States, it's often hardwood trees. Okay, so let's take a closer look at the difference in between primary and secondary succession. Okay, so this is primary succession. Okay, this occurs in an environment devoid of vegetation and other organisms. That could be the result of a volcanic activity or uplift of tectonic plates. This could create new land that does not have anything on it. So remember, the main thing about primary succession is that this is land that has never supported life. Okay, and this could come about from a couple of different examples. There's two in there, but basically this has never supported life. Let's start way over there on the left-hand side, and then we'll work our way over to the right-hand side. And I'll use this picture to kind of explain it a little bit. So imagine you have some uplift or a volcano erupts and makes new land once that lava kind of cools. Okay, this is the process of how the plants would change over time. Okay, we would start off with that bare rock. There's really no soil here. The rocks are all intact and they need to be broken down. Okay, the first types of life we're going to have appear are known as our pioneer species. And these are going to be things like mosses, lichen, algae, and fungi. These are things that do not need much soil in order to live. You've probably seen moss. It will grow on the side of the rock or a side of a tree, so it doesn't really need that soil, but it'll start to break those rocks down when the roots start to grow. Okay? Then after that, we'll have these annual herbaceous plants. Those are basically like herbs. Think of anything, oregano, thyme, those are all herbaceous plants. Okay? After that, we'll have perennial herbaceous plants and grasses. So instead of only blooming once a year, perennial plants come back every year, right? And what I want you to notice, look at this picture close to the Roman numerals 1, 2, 3, and 4. Notice how we started with all gray there on the left, and then on the right we're ending with all brown. That's supposed to represent this rock being broken down into soil. The roots and the water and the weather are going to erode and weather these rocks down and make it more soil-like, which is going to be better for our plants that need to grow their roots. Okay? So after the annual herbaceous plants and the perennial herbaceous plants, the next thing that we'll start to see are shrubs. These are small bush-like plants, right? After that, we'll have shade-intolerant trees. These are usually your softwoods, like pines. They grow very, very quickly, and they do well in areas where there's not much shade. And then eventually, those will be replaced with our shade-tolerant trees. And these are often hardwood trees. Okay, so you can see how we started off with nothing, and then as time goes on, the plants that make up this ecosystem changed. And that changing from one type of organism to the next is known as succession. Because we started off in an area that never had life on it, that was primary succession. Let's take a closer look at secondary succession next. Okay, so for secondary succession, remember that this starts off with land that is supporting life, but then something happens, some sort of disturbance happens to clear the land. And there's a couple of different examples of what might do that. So one really good example is fire, okay? Forest fires are most common in the United States. Out of anywhere in the world, we get the most of them. This picture really shows what's going on. You can see that whole forest is on fire, right? And so the next morning, or when these fires finally burn down, this forest is going to look totally different than how we started, right? All those trees that you see in this picture probably aren't going to be there anymore. Some other things that might cause secondary succession to happen is this volcanic eruption. You can imagine how this pyroclastic flow and the lava coming out of it could disturb the ecosystem around it. This is Mount St. Helens in America. This is one of the biggest volcanic eruptions that we've seen in recent times. Let me show you what it looked like. So Mount St. Helens, the top of the mountain blew off and there was a ton of ash and debris and smoke. We call that ash and debris and smoke coming out of a volcano pyroclastic flow. There's like really hot stuff mixed in with all that dust and debris. So when it's going down the mountain, it destroyed this whole forest. All these little brown things right here, those are all trees. And so you can see that pyroclastic flow just totally wiped out this forest, okay? So once a disturbance happens, then the process of rebuilding the forest or the community is going to start. And that is called secondary succession. So this picture kind of shows what secondary succession is like. Let me just point out, look at number 1, that top left picture. This is different than primary succession because here in secondary succession, we already have a fully functioning ecosystem. In that primary succession, we didn't have that, okay? So let's take a look at what secondary succession might look like. Okay, so we start with a stable, deciduous forest community. Remember that deciduous is another word for trees that lose their leaves every year. So not evergreens, but more like hardwood trees. Okay, then number 2, a disturbance such as a wildfire is going to destroy the forest. Okay, in the third picture, the fire burns the forest to the ground. In the fourth picture, the fire leaves behind empty but not destroyed soil. So notice that the soil in number 4 is not gray like it was in the primary succession. It's brown. This is soil. It's not just rock, okay? Then number 5 on the next row there, the grasses and other herbaceous plants grow back first. These are the things that grow the fastest. They bounce back really quickly, right? And so you'll start to see those small plants come back first. Then we'll have small bushes and trees begin to colonize the area. Number 7, fast-growing evergreen trees develop to their fullest, while shade-tolerant trees develop in the understory. So you can see in 7 right now, we've got those triangle-shaped pines, but then kind of smaller to that are those hardwood trees. But then lastly, the short-lived and shade-intolerant evergreen trees die as the larger deciduous trees overlap them. The ecosystem is now back to a similar state to where it began. And this would be over the course of many decades, right? These hardwood trees really take a long time to grow back. you would probably see those grasses and shrubs. Maybe in the first decade, the pines are going to take a little bit longer, but this whole process could be over the course of 6 or 7 or more decades, right? So this is not a very quick process, okay? So y'all, thank you so much for making it here today. Your teacher has some other work for you to do, so make sure to give that your best effort, and I hope everybody has a great day.